space, a brand new chart for the head and for the heart. It's your journey, your tools.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. This is the show that aims to give you that operational intelligence, the stuff you need to navigate the world around you. And today, we are diving deep, really deep, into something absolutely critical, something that really touches every part of your life, your well-being. We're talking about the quality of your intimate relationships, but we're not, just talking about fuzzy feelings or cliches about love. No, we are looking at the actual architecture of intimacy, how it's built. And for this deep dive, our sources are, they're rigorous. We've pulled together some of the most influential psychological thinking attachment theory, mainly Merrily, and we've combined that with three really essential practical tools, things you need for day-to-day trust, for resilience in your relationships. So we're aiming to move beyond just pointing out the problems, We want to get right into the mechanics. How do you actually solve them?
Yeah, and I think we have to start by acknowledging this central tension, right? So many relationships, the ones we see in studies or just observe around us, they don't necessarily fail because love is missing, or even basic compatibility sometimes. Often it comes down to a critical skill gap.
A skill gap.
Okay, exactly. Love gives you the fuel, the desire, sure. But the skills, things like really getting attachment, setting boundaries that work, managing conflict without destroying each other. That's the framework, that's the architecture that holds the love safely. And without those skills, partners end up feeling completely unheard. Their needs aren't met. They feel isolated, deeply isolated, even if they're living under the same roof.
That difference between just wanting it, the motivation, and knowing how to build it, the skill, that sounds like everything. So our mission today, it's pretty ambitious, I guess. We're essentially trying to give you the blueprint and the tools for a complete relational renovation project. We'll start by digging into that hidden blueprint, the attachment style that kind of dictates why you connect or struggle to connect the way you do. And then we get practical. We master those three essential construction tools: active listening and validation, setting healthy boundaries, and what's often called fair fighting. Okay, let's unpack this, starting right at the beginning, with that fundamental psychological blueprint that really governs every deep connection you'll ever make.
Right.
So, attachment. This really goes back to the mid-20th century, doesn't it? John Bowlby's work. Before him, the thinking was often quite simplistic, like babies bond with mom because she feeds them. Food equals love, basically. But Bowlby just completely turned that on its head. He argued that this drive, this need to form emotional bonds, it's primary. It's biologically programmed into us for survival.
Yeah, and looking at it through that evolutionary lens is, it's fascinating. Bowlby's idea was that we're born with this innate system, the attachment behavioral system.
Yeah.
It's a product of natural selection. Think about it. Historically, an infant who stayed close to a caregiver sought proximity, was just safer. From predators, from the elements, everything.
Right, makes sense.
So this proximity seeking, especially when we're stressed or scared, that became the set goal of the whole system. Stay safe by staying connected. The real measure of a caregiver isn't just providing food, it's providing that consistent safety net, protection.
And the classic proof, maybe the most striking proof that just blew up that old food equals love idea, came from Harry Harlow. Those rhesus monkey experiments, they're pretty famous.
Infamous, maybe, but yes, incredibly influential. Harlow's work just showed, quite dramatically, that the bond isn't about food, it's about comfort. When he separated those infant monkeys, gave them two fake mothers, one wire mesh, but it had milk, the other soft terry cloth. No milk.
They always chose the cloth one, didn't they?
Overwhelmingly. They clung to that soft mother for comfort, for security. They only went to the wire mother when they absolutely had to for food. They chose warmth, contact, comfort, that feeling of psychological safety over just, getting calories. That really cemented nurturance and responsiveness as the core ingredients.
So if that early responsiveness is there, it's consistent, you get a solid foundation. But the really lasting impact, the thing that carries forward, is what Bowlby called the internal working model, the IWM. This is how those early experiences get projected onto basically every adult relationship we have later on.
Precisely. The IWM is, effectively, it's a cognitive blueprint. It's the set of deep, often unconscious mental ideas about two key things. One, the self, like, am I fundamentally worthy of love, of attention? And two, others. Are people generally reliable? Can I count on them? Are they trustworthy? And this model gets forged, interaction by interaction, through thousands of tiny moments with your main caregiver in infancy and childhood.
So consistent, sensitive care builds a positive model.
Exactly. You internalize. I am worthy, and others are generally dependable. That's a positive IWM. But if care was inconsistent, maybe rejecting, maybe even chaotic, you build a negative or an ambivalent IWM. And the key insight really for our deep dive today is that this IWM isn't just like stored memory, it acts as a perceptual filter in your adult life.
A filter? How so?
It actively shapes how you interpret things, especially ambiguous signals from a partner. So someone with an anxious attachment, their IWM, often includes a sort of negative view of self. They might see their partner taking 2 hours to text back, not as, oh, they're probably busy, but through the filter, it becomes they're pulling away, they don't care, they're rejecting me.
Wow. Okay.
Conversely, someone who's more dismissive, avoidant, they often have a negative view of others as being needy or unreliable. So their filter might screen out their partner's totally legitimate bids for closeness because those needs feel threatening to their sense of self-sufficiency. It's this hidden blueprint that can create conflict even when, objectively, there isn't much there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's map this IWM onto the specific patterns we actually see in adult romance. Researchers talk about these 2 dimensions, right? Anxiety, how much you worry about being abandoned, and avoidance, how uncomfortable you are with closeness. And where those intersect, we get the 4 main adult styles.
Let's start with the ideal, the foundation.
Yeah.
The secure attachment style. These individuals typically had caregivers who were generally available, generally responsive. So they built that positive IWM, positive view of self, positive view of others, what that looks like in practice. They're comfortable with intimacy, but also fine with independence. They can balance the two.
So they're not clingy, but they're not distant either.
Exactly. They tend to communicate their needs pretty directly. They're usually good listeners. And when conflict comes up, because it always does, they approach it looking for solutions, not assigning blame. They're kind of the gold standard because their sense of self isn't totally dependent on the relationship. They can regulate their own emotions pretty well. They engage with their partner.
Okay, now for the insecure styles. Let's start with the one that's high on that anxiety dimension. Anxious, preoccupied. Where does that usually come from?
Typically, it stems from inconsistent caregiving. You know, a parent who was sometimes really warm and tuned in, but other times maybe neglectful, withdrawn, or unpredictable.
So the child never knew what to expect.
Right. And that inconsistency creates this chronic background hum of relational anxiety. Their core fear becomes abandonment, rejection. They develop this deep-seated need for external validation, for reassurance. Their internal story often sounds like, my partner is amazing, maybe even idealized, positive others, but I'm flawed, I'm not good enough, I might screw this up and lose them, negative self.
And how does that play out in their behavior?
It often leads to hypervigilance. They're constantly scanning their partner, looking for tiny signs of disapproval or distance, a shift in tone, a delayed text. It can all feel catastrophic.
That sounds exhausting.
It is.
Wow.
And to manage that internal anxiety, they often engage in what are called protest behaviors.
Protest behaviors, like what?
Things like excessive texting or calling, needing constant reassurance, do you still love me? Maybe creating drama or a crisis just to get the partner's attention and confirm they still care. Intense jealousy can be part of it too. Or clinging. What they're trying to do unconsciously is force proximity. They want to close that perceived distance to calm down their own activated attachment system.
But does it work?
Ironically, no. These very behaviors, designed to pull the partner closer, often end up pushing them away, which then just confirms their original fear. See? I knew you'd leave me. It's a tough cycle.
Okay, so the flip side of that coin is the dismissive avoidance style. Low anxiety, but high on avoidance. What's the typical background there?
Often it's rooted in caregiving that was consistently rejecting, dismissive of emotions, or maybe just emotionally distant, where expressing vulnerability felt unsafe or pointless. So the avoidant individual learns really early on, relying on others doesn't work, it might even be dangerous. I just have to rely on myself. Intense self-reliance becomes their primary defense.
So their fear isn't being abandoned, it's being controlled.
Exactly. Lots of independence. Being engulfed or controlled by someone else's needs. Their IWM tends to be, I'm strong, capable, self-sufficient, causative self. But other people are often needy, demanding, unreliable, negative others.
So what happens when a relationship starts to get more serious? Or when a partner needs real emotional support?
That's when their internal closeness alarm goes off. Maybe the partner wants to move in, share deeper feelings, or needs significant support. This feels threatening. So they deploy deactivating strategies. These are behaviors specifically designed to create distance, to regain that feeling of emotional space and control.
Like what? Just pulling away?
Yeah, things like emotionally shutting down, stonewalling, suddenly becoming hypercritical, focusing on the partner's flaws as a reason to distance themselves, maybe burying themselves in work or hobbies, or just saying abruptly, I need space. They use distance to manage their own discomfort with intimacy, which of course leaves their partner feeling confused, rejected, maybe panicked.
And you can see immediately how an anxious person pursuing closeness with those protest behaviors and an avoidant person retreating with deactivating strategies.
It's the classic push-pull. Each person's strategy triggers the other's deepest fear. It's incredibly painful and exhausting for both. It fuels so much relationship conflict.
Okay. And the last one. The fearful avoidant, sometimes called disorganized.
This one is the most complex, definitely, because it's built on a contradiction. It usually stems from a background where the caregiver was frightening or chaotic. The person who was supposed to be the source of safety was also a source of fear.
So both comfort and danger from the same person.
Exactly, which leads to a negative view of self and a negative view of others. They desperately crave intimacy. They want connection badly. But as soon as they start getting close, they get terrified of being hurt, of being overwhelmed, of repeating the past. It creates this profound internal conflict. Their relationships are often unstable, marked by this really intense push-pull dynamic, but it's happening inside them.
How does that look from the outside?
It can look really unpredictable. They might pursue someone intensely, be incredibly passionate for a short time, and then suddenly, inexplicably, cut off all contact, vanish. Then maybe they reappear, full of remorse, wanting connection again. They're caught between desperately wanting closeness and being terrified by it. It's like driving with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. They often feel trapped in a state of internal chaos.
Okay. So understanding this blueprint, our own default tendencies, especially under stress, that's clearly step one. But just knowing isn't enough, right? Knowledge doesn't change behavior on its own.
Not at all.
Which brings us to the first practical tool we need to start actually renovating that architecture, building something more secure. Right, so the first tool, we live in this age of constant communication, right? Texts, email, social media. We're always talking. But it feels like real connection, deep connection, is getting rarer. There's a paradox there.
There absolutely is. And a big part of the problem is that we often confuse just hearing someone with actually listening to them.
What's the difference, really?
Well, hearing is passive. It's physiological. Sound waves hit your eardrum, your brain registers it. That's it. Active listening, though, is totally different. It's intentional. It's conscious. It takes real cognitive and emotional energy. You have to deliberately choose to focus, to try and grasp the entirety of what the other person is communicating. Not just the words, but the feelings behind them, the meaning, the whole experience.
And making that effort sends a message itself.
A powerful one.
Mm-hmm.
It says, non-verbally, you matter. What you're saying is important enough for me to pause my own thoughts, my own agenda, and give you my full attention. That act in itself starts to build safety.
So the big mental shift we need to make is moving away from what you might call listening to respond, where you're basically just waiting for your turn to talk, formulating your counter-argument, maybe finding flaws in what they're saying.
Right. You're only half listening at best.
And shifting instead to listening to understand, where your only goal in that moment is to fully grasp their world, their perspective. You have to put your own stuff completely on hold.
That's the goal. It's harder than it sounds, but it's crucial.
So how do we actually do that? What are the mechanics of listening actively?
It works on two levels, nonverbal and verbal. And they have to match up. Congruence is key. If you say, I'm listening, but your body language screams, I'm bored or I'm distracted, the body language wins every single time.
Okay, so non-verbally, what does that look like?
First, full presence. That means eliminating the obvious distractions. Put the phone down, face down, out of sight ideally. Turn off the TV. Make a conscious effort to be there. Then, adopt an open and receptive posture. Face your partner directly. Uncross your arms. That's a classic closed-off signal. Maybe lean in slightly to show engagement. And eye contact is important, not staring intensely. That's creepy. But aiming for that comfortable zone, maybe 50 to 70% of the time, looking at them shows you're connected and tracking with them. It signals emotional availability.
Okay, makes sense. Put the phone away, lean in, look at them. What about the verbal side? What do we actually say?
The verbal tools are all about ensuring you've actually understood correctly and showing them that you have. It's not about driving the conversation forward your way. The single most powerful technique is reflecting and paraphrasing.
So saying it back to them in your own words.
Exactly. You summarize both the content, the facts of what they said, and crucially, the underlying emotion you heard. And then this is the key, we check if you got it right. So you might say something like, okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you felt really hurt and maybe a bit ignored when I didn't call last night. because it felt like I wasn't prioritizing you. Is that about right?
Ah, is that right? Part is crucial. It gives them a chance to correct you.
Totally. It shows you care about accuracy, not just about being seen to listen, and it prevents misunderstandings from derailing the whole conversation.
What else verbally?
Using open-ended questions. We tend to ask closed questions that just get a yes or no. Instead, ask things that invite more reflection and sharing. Like, instead of, were you upset? How did that situation make you feel? Or instead of, did you finish the project? Huh? Maybe, can you tell me more about how the project went?
It opens the door to deeper sharing.
Okay, this next part. This feels like where things get really powerful. You mentioned emotional validation. This seems like the core of building that safety, maybe even the key to calming down conflicts.
It really is. I'd argue it's probably the most potent tool we have for connection, and especially for de-escalation when things get tense.
But what is validation exactly? Because I think people often get it wrong.
They do. The absolute critical distinction we have to make is that validation is not agreement. Let me say that again. You do not have to agree with your partner's reaction or their interpretation of events to validate their feeling.
Okay, not agreement. So what is it then? It's the act of recognizing, understanding, and accepting their emotion as legitimate, as understandable from their unique perspective. It's communicating, given your history, your sensitivities, your viewpoint right now, your feelings make sense.
Your feelings make sense even if I think they're overreacting.
Even then. Because you're validating the feeling, not necessarily the objective accuracy of their interpretation. You're validating their subjective experience.
And you mentioned this has a real biological effect. It's not just like being nice.
Oh, absolutely not. There's a solid neuroscience behind this. When someone feels truly heard, truly understood, truly validated, it literally calms their nervous system down. It reduces the activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. It helps shift the body out of that fight or flight state, the adrenaline and cortisol flooding.
The flooding you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Validation activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming part. It can lower stress hormones and actually trigger the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. No. So you're literally moving the interaction from a potential battleground where defenses are high to a space where connection and problem solving become possible again. It works on a physiological level.
Okay, this is huge. So let's get practical. What kind of language immediately invalidates someone? What are the phrases we absolutely need to stop using?
Oh, there are some common culprits. Anything that minimizes or dismisses their experience, like you're overreacting, or it's not that big of a deal, or you shouldn't feel that way, or the classic, why are you getting so upset about this? Or even trying to cheer them up too quickly, like, look on the bright side.
Right. All of those basically say, your feeling is wrong or inconvenient for me.
Precisely. They shut down the emotional sharing.
So what are the validating alternatives? What should we be saying instead?
Focus on empathy and acceptance. Use phrases like, wow, that sounds incredibly difficult. Or, I can see why you'd be upset about that. That makes total sense. Or, it sounds like you felt really disappointed when that happened. Or, even just reflecting the feeling back. So you're feeling really frustrated right now.
And a key point you mentioned earlier, maybe the biggest barrier here is jumping in too quickly to fix the problem.
Yes. Premature problem solving.
Yeah.
It's often well-intentioned. We see someone we care about in pain, and our instinct is to make the pain stop, to offer solutions. But if you haven't validated the feeling first, jumping to solutions feels invalidating. It communicates, your feelings aren't okay, let's just make them go away.
So you have to resist the urge to fix it immediately.
You have to. True validation often requires just sitting with their discomfort for a moment, being present, letting them know their feeling is okay before you brainstorm solutions. Tolerate the feeling first, then problem solve together.
Okay, so we've built safety outwards through listening and validation. Now, tool number 2 seems to shift the focus inward to protecting ourselves. We're talking about boundaries. And I like the way our sources frame this. Boundaries are like fences, not walls. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Walls are about isolation, shutting people out completely. Fences, though, they just clarify the property line. They define where your space begins and ends, allowing for healthy interaction across the fence. Boundaries are absolutely essential for respectful, authentic relationships. They're not about being selfish or pushing people away. They're about self-preservation. They define what you're responsible for and what you're not. And here's a really critical distinction we have to hammer home. A healthy boundary is primarily an act of self-regulation. It's about governing your own response, your own actions. It is not an attempt to control someone else's behavior.
That's huge, because often you hear people say things like, my boundary is that you can't yell at me. But that depends on the other person complying.
Exactly. That's trying to control them. A boundary focused on self-regulation sounds different. It might be. I find yelling really overwhelming. If the conversation turns into yelling, I will need to step away and we can talk later when things are calm.
Ah, okay. The focus is on your action, what you will do to protect your own peace or energy, regardless of what they choose to do.
Precisely. You're managing your side of the fence.
So if we don't set these kinds of protective fences, what happens? What's the actual psychological cost of living without clear boundaries, especially in close relationships?
The costs are significant,
Yeah.
and they really build up over time. The first obvious one is just sheer burnout and emotional exhaustion. When you don't have boundaries around your time, your energy, your resources, you constantly overcommit. You say yes when you mean no, maybe out of guilt or obligation. You end up depleted, running on empty, because there's no protected space for your own rest, your own needs, your own recovery.
Okay, burnout. What else?
The second cost, and this is a really crucial emotional signal, is the slow poison of resentment.
Resentment. That feels familiar in boundary struggles.
It's probably the most significant emotional red flag that a boundary has been repeatedly crossed or ignored. Resentment is basically accumulated, unexpressed anger. It builds up every time you sacrifice a core need, maybe for rest or respect or financial security or emotional safety, to accommodate someone else without it being acknowledged or reciprocated. Each sacrifice adds a little bit to that reservoir of bitterness. And that feeling of being taken for granted, of your needs not mattering, it just eats away at affection, at respect, at the very foundation of the relationship.
Wow. The slow poison. That's potent. And there's a third cost, too, related to anxiety.
Yes, a lot of chronic anxiety actually stems from feeling responsible for things that are fundamentally outside our control, primarily other people's feelings, reactions, choices, or happiness.
Trying to manage their emotions for them.
Exactly. Healthy boundaries help clarify the limits of personal responsibility. They draw a line. I am responsible for my own actions, my own reactions, my own efforts. I am not responsible for controlling your feelings or making you happy. Just defining that clearly can significantly lighten the mental and emotional load that causes so much anxiety, the burden of trying to manage the unmanageable.
Okay, but let's be real. For a lot of people, especially if they lean towards that anxious style or they're just natural people pleasers, saying no feels terrifying, almost physically painful. There's this deep fear, isn't there? Fear of conflict, fear of disappointing someone, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of losing love or approval.
Absolutely. That internal resistance is incredibly powerful. It's often rooted in those early attachment experiences, where maybe setting a limit did lead to withdrawal of affection or anger.
So how do we overcome that? What are some concrete techniques for someone who finds saying no really, really hard?
Well, first, it helps to remember the different types of boundaries we might need to set. It's not just about saying no to requests. We need physical boundaries about personal space, touch, emotional boundaries like not taking on your partner's bad mood as your own or protecting your right to feel differently, and time-energy boundaries protecting your schedule, declining extra work or social commitments when you're overloaded.
Right, so specific techniques for saying no.
One very useful one is the no sandwich. It kind of softens the blow while still being clear.
How does that work?
3 parts. First, something positive or appreciative. Thanks so much for thinking of me for that project. I really appreciate the opportunity. Second, the clear, direct no, stated simply, without excessive justification. Unfortunately, I just don't have the bandwidth to take that on right now, or my plate is too full this month. Third, another positive or goodwill statement. I hope it goes really well. Or maybe another time when things are less hectic.
Okay. Appreciate. No, appreciate. Respectful but firm. What about that knee-jerk yes that just flies out of your mouth before you can stop it?
Ah, yes, the automatic people-pleaser response. For that, we need the buy time strategy. The goal is to break that immediate reactive pattern. So when someone makes a request, especially a significant one, don't answer immediately. Train yourself to pause. Respond with something neutral like, that sounds interesting. Let me check my calendar, my commitments, and get back to you tomorrow morning. Or, I need to think about whether I have the capacity for that right now. Can I let you know by the end of the day?
So you create a buffer.
A pause.
Exactly. It creates space between the request and your response. It allows you to move from that reactive fear-based yes to a conscious, intentional decision based on your actual capacity and needs.
But even if you manage to say no, then comes the guilt, right?
Yeah.
Especially for people pleasers. How do you handle that wave of, oh no, I'm a terrible person?
That requires ongoing work with cognitive reframing. You have to actively challenge those guilt-inducing thoughts when they pop up. So, the thought arrives. I'm such a bad friend, partner, colleague for saying no. You catch it. And you consciously replace it with a more balanced, realistic truth. Something like, I am a caring friend, and I also have limits. Saying no to this request allows me to protect my energy so I can show up better for the commitments I have made. Honoring my limits actually makes me more reliable and less resentful in the long run. It's about reminding yourself that self-care isn't selfish, it's necessary.
And what about when you set a boundary and the other person pushes back? They get angry or try to guilt you or argue.
That's where you need a simple, calm, repeatable phrase, sometimes called the broken record technique. You don't get drawn into justifying, arguing, or defending the boundary. You just calmly restate it, perhaps acknowledging their feeling, but holding firm. So if they say, you're being so selfish, you might respond calmly, I understand you're disappointed, but this is what I need to do right now. Or, I hear that you disagree, but my decision stands. You just repeat the core message without escalating or JDing, justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining excessively. Hold the line.
Okay, we've covered building safety with listening and protecting ourselves with boundaries. Now, the third tool tackles something unavoidable: conflict. The sources are clear. Conflict isn't inherently bad. Even the healthiest relationships have disagreements. The difference is how they handle it. Can conflict actually be constructive?
Absolutely. Managed well, conflict can actually strengthen a relationship. It forces you to clarify needs, understand differences, and find new ways to connect. The crucial shift in mindset, the core of fair fighting, is moving away from the idea that conflict is a battle to be won. That's a win-lose mentality. If I win by making you give in or shutting you down, the relationship ultimately loses because trust is damaged, resentment builds.
So the goal isn't victory.
No, the goal is peace, or rather collaborative problem solving. It's transforming the dynamic from me versus you to us versus the problem. We're looking for a win-win solution. It involves shifting from arguing about positions, I want you to do X, to understanding the underlying interests or needs. Why do I want X? What fundamental need does that meet for me? And what need does your position meet for you?
Getting underneath the demands to the actual needs.
Exactly. Once you uncover those deeper, often shared needs like needing to feel respected or secure or connected, you open up space to find creative solutions that can meet both partners' core needs, even if the initial position seemed completely opposed.
Okay, so to fight fairly, to aim for that win-win, we first need to eliminate the behaviors that guarantee a loss for the relationship. This brings us to Dr. John Gottman's famous 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. These are the communication styles he found that predict relationship breakdown with frightening accuracy.
That's right. Identifying and stopping these 4 is probably the single most important thing couples can do to improve how they handle conflict.
Let's name them first.
They are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Okay, let's break them down. First, criticism. How is that different from just like bringing up a complaint?
That distinction is vital. A complaint focuses on a specific behavior and is usually delivered without blame. For example, I felt worried when you were late and didn't call, or the trash didn't get taken out last night. It's about an action or lack of action. Criticism, however, goes beyond the behavior and attacks the partner's character or personality. It uses blaming you statements. So instead of the complaint, criticism sounds like, you're always late, you're so inconsiderate, or you never help out, you're just lazy.
So it implies there's something fundamentally wrong with the person.
Exactly. And because it's a personal attack, what does it immediately invite?
Defensiveness.
Right. Criticism basically guarantees the other person will put their walls up.
Okay, Horseman 2. You said this one is the most destructive. Contempt.
Contempt is pure poison to a relationship. Gottman found it's the single greatest predictor of divorce. It's communicating disgust, disdain, superiority. It goes beyond criticism to actively mocking or insulting the partner.
What does it look like in practice?
It can be sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, hostile humor, mimicking the partner. Any communication that essentially says, I am better than you and I find you pathetic or disgusting.
Wow, that sounds absolutely corrosive. It just destroys any foundation of respect or affection.
Completely. It erodes the admiration and fondness that are essential for a relationship to thrive.
So if contempt is fueled by simmering negativity and a loss of respect, the antidote must be about actively rebuilding that positive foundation.
Precisely. The antidote to contempt is deliberately building a culture of appreciation and respect. This means making a conscious, consistent effort to notice and verbalize the things you appreciate about your partner, their positive qualities, small acts of kindness, things you admire. Expressing fondness regularly, not just when things are good. Gottman talks about needing a ratio of something like 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction, the 5.1 ratio, just to keep the relationship stable. You need that positive emotional bank account to buffer against the inevitable conflicts. Contempt drains that account dry.
Okay. Horseman 3, defensiveness. This feels like a really common reaction when you feel attacked.
It is. It's almost instinctual, but it's incredibly destructive to dialogue. Defensiveness is essentially refusing to take any responsibility, shifting blame, or playing the victim. When faced with a complaint or criticism, the defensive person might say, "It's not my fault, it's yours." Or, "Well, maybe I did that, but you do this other thing that's way worse." Whataboutism. Or they make excuses. It effectively shuts down any possibility of understanding the other person's perspective or finding a solution, because the message is, the problem isn't me, it's you.
It just escalates things. Okay, and the fourth horseman, stonewalling.
Stonewalling is basically withdrawing from the interaction. It's the silent treatment, physically leaving the room without warning, refusing to make eye contact, giving monosyllabic answers, just emotionally shutting down.
And you mentioned earlier this is often linked to that feeling of being flooded.
Very often, yes. Stonewalling is frequently a self-protective response when someone feels completely overwhelmed emotionally and physiologically. That flooding state we talked about, heart rate soaring, stress hormones pumping, rational thought shutting down.
Right, fight or flight kicks in.
Exactly. The body perceives the interaction, maybe even the partner, as a threat. Stonewalling is an attempt, often unconscious, to stop the perceived attack, to create safety by disengaging entirely. The problem is, to the partner, it feels like abandonment, like punishment, like you don't care.
So how do you deal with stonewalling, especially if it's triggered by flooding? You can't just force someone to engage when they're in that state.
You absolutely cannot. The antidote here is the strategic timeout. And this needs to be agreed upon in advance, during a calm time, as a shared strategy. When either partner feels themselves starting to flood heart racing, feeling overwhelmed, wanting to lash out or shut down, they use an agreed-upon signal, like saying I need a break or a hand gesture, to pause the conversation immediately.
And the key is the length of the break, right?
Yes, the research is specific here. The timeout needs to last for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes. That's how long it generally takes for the body's stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, to metabolize and the nervous system to calm down enough to re-engage constructively.
And what do you do during that 20-30 minutes? Just stew about the argument.
Absolutely not. That defeats the purpose. The time must be spent doing something genuinely self-soothing and distracting. Things that lower your heart rate, like deep breathing exercises, listening to calming music, going for a walk separately, reading something unrelated, anything except replaying the argument in your head or planning your next attack. The goal is physiological calm, not mental rehearsal. Then you agree to come back and resume the conversation respectfully.
Okay, so we've cleared out the destructive horsemen. What do we replace them with? What are the pillars, the positive behaviors we need to build for constructive conflict, for that fair fighting?
There are a few key ones building on what we've discussed. The first involves fundamentally restructuring how we state our complaints, moving away from blame. This is where I statements come in.
Right, the classic I feel, not you are.
Exactly, but a really effective I statement has a specific structure, often 4 parts, that makes it much harder for the other person to get defensive. Part 1. Observation. State a neutral, objective observation of the specific behavior, no judgment. When the dishes are left in the sink overnight. Part 2. Feeling. State your own specific emotion using I feel frustrated, or I feel unsupported. Part 3. Impact need. Explain the concrete impact on you or the underlying need that isn't being met, because it feels like the household chores aren't shared equally, and I need us to feel like a team. Part 4. Request. Make a clear, positive request for a change in behavior. Could we agree to make sure the dishes are rinsed and put in the dishwasher before we go to bed?
Observation, feeling, impact, need, request. That's very clear. It keeps the focus on your experience, not their character flaws.
Precisely. It's much less likely to trigger defensiveness than starting with you never do the dishes.
Okay. What's the next pillar?
It relates directly to countering criticism, the first horseman. It's using a gentle startup. Gottman found that the way a conflict conversation begins in the first few minutes predicts its outcome with remarkable accuracy. Harsh startups, beginning with criticism, blame, or sarcasm, almost always lead to destructive cycles.
So a gentle startup is?
It's initiating the complaint softly, focusing on the problem, not the person, expressing a need, not a criticism, using I statements from the get-go. So instead of, you never want to spend time with me anymore, harsh startup.
Yeah.
You might say, hey, I've been feeling a bit disconnected lately, and I really miss our quality time together. Could we maybe plan a date night this week? See the difference? It invites collaboration, not defense.
Yeah, completely different tone, much more inviting. And the last pillar.
This one is about keeping the conflict manageable. The principle of specificity. To avoid getting overwhelmed and escalating things, you have to try really hard to stick to one issue at a time.
Avoiding what's sometimes called kitchen sinking.
Exactly. Kitchen sinking is when you start arguing about who didn't take out the trash, and suddenly you're bringing up that thing they said 3 years ago and how their mother criticized you last Christmas, and you throw everything but the kitchen sink into the argument.
Right, and then nothing gets resolved because it's just this huge mess of grievances.
Precisely. Sticking to one specific issue gives the conversation focus and makes resolution actually possible. And related to specificity is ruthlessly eliminating those absolute words. Always and never. As in, you always interrupt me, or you never listen. They're rarely true, they're highly inflammatory, and they invite defensiveness immediately because the other person can always think of one exception. Stick to specifics. I felt interrupted just now when I was trying to finish my point.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot. The blueprint of attachment, the tools of listening, boundaries, fair fighting. It's quite the toolkit. But it also feels potentially overwhelming. What if someone listening has really recognized themselves in one of those insecure styles? Anxious, avoidant, maybe even fearful avoidant. Hearing all this, does it mean they're just stuck with that blueprint? Are they doomed to repeat these patterns forever?
That is such an important question, and the really, really encouraging news from decades of attachment research is the answer is a clear no. Absolutely not. Attachment styles, while they're deeply ingrained, are not fixed for life. They're not like eye color. The internal working model is powerful, yes, but research shows significant malleability, significant potential for change throughout our adult lives. We are capable of profound growth here.
That's incredibly hopeful.
It really is. This capacity for change leads to what researchers call earned security.
Earned security. Okay, what is that?
Earned security is the term used to describe the process and the outcome where adults who grew up with insecure attachment patterns, maybe due to difficult, inconsistent, or even traumatic early caregiving, manage to develop a secure attachment style later in life. They essentially earn their security through later experiences and conscious effort. It's a powerful testament to resilience, to the brain's plasticity, and to the healing power of relationships.
So if the blueprint isn't set in stone, how does the change actually happen? How does someone rewire that? It must involve new experiences, right? Corrective ones.
Absolutely. The primary engine of change seems to be sustained corrective relational experiences. These are relationships often with a partner, a close friend, or significantly a therapist that provide a different kind of attachment experience than the one imprinted in childhood. Dr. Sue Johnson's work with emotionally focused therapy really highlights the key ingredients, often summarized by the acronym ARE. Are you accessible, responsive, and engaged?
ARE. Okay, break that down.
For a relationship to be corrective, the other person, the partner, friend, therapist, needs to be consistently accessible, meaning, can I reach you? Are you emotionally available? Can I get your attention when I need connection or support? Responsive, meaning, when I reach for you, do you tune in? Do you understand and validate my needs, my signals, my emotions? Do you respond in a way that meets the underlying need? And engaged, meaning, are you truly present? Are you invested emotionally in this relationship? Do I feel like I matter to you, like you're in it with me?
Accessible, responsive, engaged. Okay, so having a relationship where someone consistently provides those ARE qualities, that's what starts to heal the old wounds.
That's the idea. But especially the responsiveness piece. How does that look in daily life? It's often in the small moments. Gottman calls them bids for connection.
Bids for connection.
Yeah, tiny moments where one partner reaches out for attention, affection, or support. It could be as simple as sighing and saying, man, I'm exhausted, or putting out something interesting they saw. A corrective experience happens when the other partner consistently turns toward that bid rather than turning away or turning against.
So instead of ignoring the sigh or saying, well, I'm tired too,
you turn towards it. You say, yeah, rough day, tell me about it. Or just offer a comforting touch. These small, consistent moments of attuned responsiveness repeated over and over. They literally start to rewire the brain's expectation of relationships. They calm down that hypervigilant threat response system, particularly the amygdala we talked about. The brain starts to learn on a deep felt physiological level. Oh, reaching out for connection leads to comfort and safety now, not rejection or danger. That felt sense of security built over time is what gradually shifts the internal working model towards security.
So it's the consistency of those positive, responsive interactions that does the work.
Consistency is key. It rebuilds trust not just in the other person, but in the very process of connection itself.
Okay. So if someone does this work, maybe through therapy, maybe in a secure relationship, what's the sign that they've really integrated it, that they've genuinely achieved that earned security? Is there a marker?
There is, and it's fascinating. Attachment researchers have found that one of the strongest indicators of earned security is the ability to narrate one's own childhood attachment history coherently.
Coherently, what does that mean?
It means they can talk about their past, even if it was difficult, painful, or chaotic, in a way that makes sense, that shows understanding and reflection. They don't dismiss the difficulty, they don't get completely overwhelmed by emotion when talking about it, nor are they vague or contradictory. They've clearly thought about how their early experiences impacted them, they've processed the emotions associated with it, and they've integrated that understanding into their current sense of self. They can tell their story, the good and the bad, in a way that hangs together logically and emotionally.
So they've made sense of their past.
Exactly. That narrative coherence is the hallmark of the healing process. It shows they're no longer trapped by their past, even though they acknowledge its influence. They've developed the ability to reflect on their internal world, often through learning to parent themselves in the ways they weren't parented. And that integration is profoundly healing.
Wow. Okay. This has been quite a journey for this deep dive. We started way back with Bowlby and the fundamental biological need for connection. We navigated the complexities of our internal blueprints, those attachment styles.
Yeah.
And then we landed on these really specific, actionable skills, tools we can actually use to build something better. Listening, validation, boundaries, fair fighting. It really drives home the point that intimacy isn't some kind of magic that just happens. It's a construction project. It requires deliberate effort.
Built on vulnerability, yes, but also on the strength of assertiveness through boundaries, and crucially, the courage to face conflict and manage it collaboratively, not destructively.
So knowing your blueprint is important, definitely. Understanding your tendencies. But the real change, the renovation work, happens in the day-to-day practice. Actually using these tools, listening actively, setting that boundary, even when it's scary, choosing an I statement instead of criticism. And it's not about being perfect, is it? It's more about repairing effectively when things go wrong, because they will.
Absolutely. Repair is key. And I think it's important to remember that practicing these skills, especially setting boundaries and truly listening, it's not just about being a good partner. It's actually a profound act of self-worth. Every time you respectfully assert a limit or you truly validate someone's feeling, or your own, you're sending a message to yourself. My needs matter, my feelings are valid, I am worthy of respect. It fundamentally transforms the relationship you have with yourself, which is the foundation for everything else.
That's a powerful reframe. It's self-care that enables better connection.
Precisely. And maybe here's a final thought, something really provocative to leave our listeners with, particularly for anyone who resonated with those insecure patterns and is maybe daunted by the work ahead. It's about the generational impact. Research consistently shows that earned secure parents, those adults who started out with insecure attachment, but did the hard work, maybe through therapy or corrective relationships, to become secure. Those earned secure parents are statistically just as effective at raising securely attached children as parents who were continuously secure their whole lives.
Wait, really? Just as effective?
Just as effective. Think about what that means. The conscious effort you put into understanding your blueprint, into mastering these skills of listening, boundaries, and repair today, it doesn't just improve your current relationships, it literally has the power to change the psychological legacy you pass on. You can break cycles of insecurity. The work you do on your own relational architecture benefits not just you, but potentially generations to come.
That is quite something to consider, the ripple effect of doing this work.
It's profound. That's the real power embedded in building a secure architecture of intimacy.
It's the strength to build anew. It's the light to guide you through. It's the choice to find your way. Starting here, starting today.
And that wraps up our special recap and all of Season 3, The Communication Blueprint. My genuine hope is that you've been able to take these tools, from attachment styles to fair fighting, and start building stronger, safer, and more connected relationships. We'll be back soon to kick off Season 4, which will be the anxiety anchor. In this next season, we are going to tackle one of the most common struggles we face: anxiety. We'll be looking at the science of your nervous system, learning how to unhook from anxious thoughts, and building a practical toolkit of grounding techniques to help you find your calm in the storm. If you found value in this season, there are 2 key ways you can support the show. First, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the start of Season 4. And second, if you'd like to help keep the lights on and support the research that goes into this show, we've set up a donation link. All the information for that is in the show notes for this episode. As always, all resources are at yourjourney.yourtools.com and the app at yourjourney.yourtools.app. Thank you so much for listening to this entire season, and I'll catch you on your journey.